Imagine waking up one morning, and by the time you go to bed, your entire world has collapsed. No warning, no preparation, just chaos. That's exactly what happened to an entire generation of people in 1914. One bullet, one wrong turn, one dead Archduke. And somehow, 20 million people ended up dead because of it. This is not just a history lesson. This is the story of how the most powerful nations on Earth, armed with the most advanced weapons ever built, decided the best thing to do was point them at each other. This is WW1, the war that didn't just kill millions, it broke the entire world. Let's set the scene. The year is 1914. Technology is booming. Fashion is evolving. Culture is thriving. People genuinely believed humanity was finally headed in the right direction. Truly, the height of civilization. So naturally, they decided to have a war. Now look, nobody just woke up one day and said, let's destroy everything. The tension had been building for decades. Like a pressure cooker nobody bothered to turn off. France was still furious at Germany for taking their land back in 1871 and wanted it back. Germany wasn't satisfied. They wanted more of everyone's stuff. And to top it off, Germany was building a massive, powerful navy that was making Britain extremely uncomfortable. Meanwhile, two giant empires, Austria, Hungary, and the Ottomans, thought they were the coolest kids in the room. But the millions of different people living inside those empires, they strongly disagreed. In fact, some of them had already been declaring independence, with a little help from Russia, who loved nothing more than stirring the pot. And if that wasn't enough, everyone was talking behind everyone else's backs, signing secret alliances, making promises they fully intended to break, and stockpiling weapons just in case. Military technology had also taken a huge leap forward since the last major war. Bigger guns, faster rifles, more destructive, everything. So you had powerful nations, old grudges, secret alliances, massive weapons, and enormous egos. Now, in the middle of all this tension, lived the Serbs and Bosnians of Austria-Hungary, people who deeply, passionately hated being ruled by Austria-Hungary. So when the Austro-Hungarian Archduke Franz Ferdinand decided to take a lovely open-top car ride through Sarajevo with his exact route published in advance for everyone to see, let's just say not everyone was excited to wave at him. A group of assassins was already waiting along the route. They threw bombs at his car. They missed, blew up some officers behind him instead. At this point, any reasonable person would have said, okay, that's enough sightseeing for today, and gone home. But Franz Ferdinand, he decided to go BACK out in the same open-top car to visit the injured officers in hospital. The driver took a wrong turn, and by sheer, almost unbelievable coincidence, the car stalled right next to one of the failed assassins, who pulled out his gun and fired. Just like that, the Archduke was dead. Austria-Hungary was furious. They suspected the Serbian government was involved, and they weren't entirely wrong. So they ran straight to their ally, Germany, and said, "We're going to war with Serbia." Germany's response? Essentially, go for it. So Austria-Hungary sent Serbia a list of demands so extreme, so deliberately impossible to accept, that it was basically a declaration of war dressed up as paperwork. Serbia refused. Austria-Hungary declared war. And then, like dominoes falling, everyone else followed. Here's where it gets truly insane. Serbia was protected by Russia. Russia was allied with France. France had an understanding with Britain. Austria-Hungary was backed by Germany, and everyone had signed so many secret agreements with each other that declaring war on 011 country was basically declaring war on ALL of them. Montenegro jumped in too, because why not? Britain tried to stay out of it at first. When France asked, "Hey, you've got our back, right?" Britain basically said, "Maybe." And for a moment, it looked like Britain might actually stay out of the whole mess, which was great news for Germany, because Germany had a plan, a very confident, very specific, very ambitious plan. Germany knew Russia was enormous, but also slow. It would take weeks for Russia to fully mobilize its army. So Germany's strategy was simple: use that time to sprint through France, knock them out fast, then swing all their forces east and crush Russia before they were even ready. Defeat France. Then defeat Russia. Then everyone speaks German and eats Pfefferpotthast every day. Solid plan. One problem. France had built massive forts and defensive lines along its entire border with Germany. Breaking through those would take forever, and Germany didn't have forever. So Germany looked at a map and said, what if we just go around them through Belgium? Belgium was neutral, had been neutral for decades, wanted nothing to do with this war. Germany asked Belgium to let 750,000 troops march through their country. Belgium said no. Germany marched through anyway. And this is what finally brought Britain into the war. Britain had guaranteed Belgium's neutrality. So when Germany invaded a neutral country, Britain declared war on Germany. Just like that, what started as a regional conflict between Austria-Hungary and Serbia had exploded into a full-scale world war. Oh, and Germany also committed atrocities while marching through Belgium, while wearing spike helmets with skulls on them. So if anyone was wondering who the bad guys were, the uniforms were doing a lot of the work. Now, let's talk about one of the greatest military disasters in human history. France's early battle strategy. Picture this. Thousands of French soldiers slowly marching in neat columns across open countryside, wearing bright blue uniforms with bright red trousers, basically gift-wrapped targets. And the Germans, with their massive artillery, spotted them immediately and tore them apart. Every nation going into this war had an old-school mentality. March forward, fight with honor, win quickly. None of them were prepared for what modern warfare actually looked like. Germany pushed deep into France and was closing in on Paris. It genuinely looked like the war might be over in weeks, just like Germany had planned. But then, a gap opened up in the German lines. The French commander-in-chief ordered his armies to stop retreating and counterattack. Allied forces poured into that gap. The Germans were forced to pull back. Both sides dug defensive trenches. Then both sides moved north, each trying to get around the other's flank. When they finally hit the sea, they were completely stuck. Trench systems now stretched from the coast of Belgium all the way to Switzerland. Neither side could go forward. Neither side could go back. Welcome to the Western Front. Welcome to the war that nobody knew how to end. Let me paint you a picture of what life in the trenches actually looked like. Imagine a narrow ditch dug into the earth. Mud everywhere, not just on the ground, but crawling up the walls, soaking through your boots, pulling at your legs like quicksand. Pools of dirty, poisonous water collecting at your feet. Rats, thousands of rats, feeding on things nobody wants to think about. The smell of decay so thick you could taste it, and the bodies. Soldiers who fell in no man's land, the stretch of destroyed earth between the two trench lines that nobody could safely reach to bury. Now add to that the sound. Artillery shells, hundreds of thousands of them, fired continuously for days at a time. The noise alone was enough to break a man's mind. Soldiers would emerge from bombardments shaking uncontrollably, unable to speak, unable to stop trembling. Shell shock, they called it. Today we call it PTSD. And then, after days of bombardment, came the order to go over the top. Climb out of your trench, cross no man's land, a wasteland of craters, barbed wire, and mud. Under machine gun fire from the other side, wave after wave of men sent forward, thousands cut down before they even reached the enemy trench. All of this, months of fighting, thousands of lives, sometimes to gain just a few kilometers of ground. This was the reality of WW1. Not glorious, not heroic, just brutal, grinding, senseless destruction on a scale the world had never seen. While Europe was tearing itself apart, the rest of the world was watching. The Allies launched one of the biggest propaganda campaigns in history, flooding newspapers, posters, and public spaces with stories of German atrocities in Belgium. And it worked. Opinions around the world began to shift. Nowhere was this more important than in the United States. American President Woodrow Wilson desperately wanted to stay out of the war. He saw himself as a peacemaker, someone who could bring both sides to the table and end the madness through negotiation. There was also a large population of German Americans in the U.S. who had initially cheered for Germany. But as stories of the atrocities in Belgium spread, that enthusiasm started to dry up fast. The war was growing, the world was changing. And the United States, despite Wilson's best efforts, was being slowly, inevitably pulled toward the conflict. Here's what makes WW1 so haunting. It didn't have to happen. Every single step toward this war, the alliances, the ultimatums, the invasions, could have been stopped. Leaders had chances to step back, to negotiate, to choose peace. They didn't. And so an entire generation of young men were fed into trenches, into machine gun fire, into mud and gas and darkness, for years. Empires that had stood for centuries collapsed. Maps were redrawn overnight. The world that existed in the summer of 1914, confident, modern, optimistic, was gone forever. Both sides were completely stuck. Trenches stretched from the sea to the mountains. Neither side could move forward. Neither side could go back. So they both sat there, staring at each other across a muddy wasteland, and asked the same question: how do we end this? The answer they came up with: make it worse. Much, much worse. Australia jumped in immediately, snatching up German New Guinea before the ink on the war declaration was even dry. The Allies swept through Germany's African colonies too. And in German East Africa, both sides recruited local Africans as soldiers and carriers, people who had absolutely nothing to do with European politics, and sent them to die for someone else's war. A tragedy that history barely remembers. New friends started showing up at the party. Japan, which was busy building its own empire, happily grabbed German islands across East Asia. Free real estate, no complaints. Italy, hilariously, had actually been allied with Germany and Austria, Hungary, before the war. But when the Allies whispered, "We'll give you some of Austria-Hungary's land," Italy looked at their old allies, looked at the offer, and said, "Germany who?" They switched sides and opened up a mountain front, where they also got completely stuck, and then the Ottoman Empire entered the chat. The Ottomans were exhausted from the recent Balkan wars and deeply divided about joining, so a few eager politicians just fired some shells at Russia without asking anyone, then came back and shrugged. Whoops, looks like we're at war now. Just like that, the Middle East was on fire too. Britain was particularly nervous about the Ottomans joining, because the Middle East was sitting on an ocean of oil, and Britain wanted every single drop of it. The Ottomans tried attacking Russia through the Caucasus Mountains in winter. They weren't prepared for the cold. Many of them froze to death before firing a single shot. Then they marched across miles of scorching desert to take the Suez Canal from Britain. That failed too. Then the Allies tried to knock out the Ottomans by attacking Gallipoli, a brutal, bloody campaign that went on for months. That also failed. At this point, everyone involved in the Middle East was having a terrible time. But the most horrific consequence of all of this was what the Ottoman government did next. They blamed their losses on the Armenian people living within Ottoman territory. And what followed was one of history's darkest chapters, the Armenian Genocide, in which 1.5 million innocent people were systematically killed. It remains one of the greatest crimes of the 20th century. Back in Europe, Germany looked at the scoreboard and realized something uncomfortable. The Allies had more men, more supplies, more colonies to pull from. And Britain's naval blockade meant Germany couldn't import food. German civilians were literally starving. Germany needed to break the stalemate. Fast. Now, before the war, there had been a very civilized international conference that laid out the rules of modern warfare. No chemical weapons, no targeting civilians. Basically, don't be a monster. Germany held a meeting and decided to be a monster. Zeppelin airships began bombing British cities at night. Chlorine gas was unleashed on Allied trenches, soldiers choking to death with no warning. And German submarines started sinking civilian ships. One of those ships was the Lusitania, carrying 195 passengers, including 128 Americans. America, which had been perfectly happy watching Europe destroy itself from a safe distance, started getting very, very angry. To be fair, the Allies quickly started using chemical weapons too. War crimes are. By 1906, the war had become something beyond brutal. It had become a competition to see which side could bleed the other dry faster. Germany launched a massive attack on the French city of Verdun, not really to take it, but to force France to throw so many men at defending it that they'd run out of soldiers. The French poured everything into holding Verdun. Hundreds of thousands died. The ground was so saturated with blood and bodies that parts of it are still off limits today. Under unbearable pressure, France called on Britain for help. So Britain launched the Battle of the Somme. 60,000 British casualties on the first day alone. Let that number sink in. It was also here that Britain quietly introduced the world to a terrifying new weapon. Something so strange, so science fiction, that soldiers on both sides didn't know what to make of it. The tank. Lumbering, armored, unstoppable. The future of warfare had arrived, covered in mud on the Somme. By 1917, everyone was exhausted. French soldiers were mutinying. German civilians were starving. And Russia, the giant that had held the Eastern Front for 3 years, was finally breaking apart. Tired of war, tired of hunger, and furious that a mysterious self-proclaimed holy man named Rasputin had been whispering in the Tsar's ear. The Russian people rose up. Riots turned into revolution. The Tsar was overthrown. Then a few months later, the Bolsheviks overthrew the people who overthrew the Tsar, and they pulled Russia out of the war entirely. Germany could now focus everything on the Western Front. But there was one enormous problem: the United States of America. America had spent the entire war getting rich selling supplies to the Allies. And now Germany, in a moment of spectacular miscalculation, sent a secret telegram to Mexico suggesting that Mexico should attack the United States in exchange for getting Texas back. Britain intercepted it, showed it to America, and that was it. America declared war on Germany. Fresh troops, fresh supplies, unlimited energy. The most powerful nation not yet broken by 3 years of war, now marching toward Europe. Germany had one last chance, and they knew it. Germany threw everything they had left into one final, desperate offensive. They hit the Allies at the Somme hard, pushed them back, hit again in the north, then again, then again. 5 massive attacks, each one spending more German lives and resources than the last. But with every punch, the Allies got stronger. American troops were arriving by the thousands every single day. The Germans were running on empty. On the 5th punch, the Allies held the line and pushed back. Bulgaria collapsed, then the Ottoman Empire, then Austria-Hungary. And finally, at 11 o'clock on the 11th day of the 11th month of 1918, Germany surrendered. The guns went silent. After 4 years, 20 million dead, empires erased from the map, and a generation of young men consumed by mud and machine guns, it was over. Germany was forced to shrink its military, accept full blame for the war, and pay crippling financial penalties. The world exhaled and declared, "Never again," which lasted about 20 years. Because the peace deal was so humiliating, so crushing, so perfectly designed to make Germany desperate, that it planted the exact seeds needed to grow an even more catastrophic war. But that is another story. Part 2 is coming. A humiliated Germany, a man named Hitler, and the war that made WW1 look like a warm-up. Subscribe so you don't miss it.